Welcome to the 19th episode of The Lucid Truth with Sterlin Lujan, Agorism in Action. I'm your host, Isaac Lindenberger, and just to touch base, the next few episodes, along with this one, are my last discussions on coronavirus. The Lucid Truth is a philosophical show with the intention of exploring unique ideas, and I trust all of you to get updates for this pandemic from credible sources. Onto the philosophical side of things, the show will be moving towards extracting the lucid truth from concepts such as free will, the self, and the nature of consciousness. Lucid dreaming, tulpas, and machine elves will also be investigated. Things may get weird, but they will certainly remain interesting. Back to today's episode. Sterlin Lujan is a cryptocurrency specialist who is an ambassador for Bitcoin.com. Sterlin is a pioneer in the field of crypto psychology and is well versed in behavioral economics and innovative technologies. We discuss the current climate of the coronavirus pandemic and how unique free market solutions may play a key role in finding creative solutions. Now, without further delay, please welcome Sterlin Lujan. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Isaac. I think this will be very beneficial.
I agree completely. We're happy to have you on. So we want to kind of talk to you about, I would like to talk to you about what's going on right now, because there's a lot of conflicting emotions and ideas that are circulating the consciousness. And so what are your individual thoughts on what is happening? And how do you see this pandemic if you were to zoom out from your immediate situation and try to see the big picture?
Right. Well, first I want to say that there are a lot of people out there who have a tendency to see this pandemic as a complete hoax. And let me explain that. What I mean by hoax is that they don't believe that it's actually happening, or that if it is happening, it is extremely limited in its scope. So I don't take that necessarily that full approach. I definitely think that it's happening. I think we have enough evidence around the world that COVID-19, coronavirus, etc., it definitely exists. But here's what I think about the situation. I definitely think that the establishment, government entities, politicians, bureaucrats, and all these folks are definitely using all the fear that's circulating as a result of the virus to gain more power, effectively as a power grab. So in that degree, the situation that we have right now is escalating even more wildly out of control, right? Because now it's not just the virus itself that's hurting people. That's one thing, but it's also the economic fallout and the calamitous situation with people's work that is going to be totally felt for a long time moving forward. I mean, in my mind, this has been an absolute travesty. I mean, we've seen where governments have used this as an excuse effectively to shut people's lives down, to effectively close and shutter businesses, to put people out of work, to institute mandatory curfews. And in some places in the world, the governments will actually kill you if you are not obeying by their rules. So the whole idea of a rights-based society, civil rights, due process, and all of these alleged triumphs of democracy have been thrown to the wayside for governments to take over. So what I've spent a lot of my time doing is trying to tell people, listen, the virus is serious, but we have to learn to handle these kinds of problems without deferring to people who ultimately want to hurt us, or they want to enrich themselves by taking advantage of the fear porn that's circulating in society. So we have to be very cautious about the way that we approach this situation as individuals, and we can't lose our heads. We can't lose our cool. We can't let the fear-mongering media and the politicians who want more power to ultimately end up controlling our lives, right? Because it's just like in 9/11, after that happened, the Patriot Act was instituted, and those measures from the Patriot Act, a lot of them were only supposed to be temporary. And when it comes to government, if you give them an inch, they will take a mile, right? Effectively, what could possibly happen is they institute all of these rules. And I think Trump right now is actually in the process of asking the DOJ to provide him powers of indefinite detention for people who are disobeying or breaking rules, or even people who broke some kind of other quote unquote law that has nothing to do with COVID-19. But allegedly, because the courts can't assemble like they used to because of the dangers of the virus, well, now they're just going to indefinitely detain these people without due process, without a trial, without a hearing from a jury of their peers. So all this madness is taking place. And after this comes to its conclusion, the virus will eventually abate, right? It will follow its course. And when everything's supposed to go back to normal, quote unquote, it really won't be normal, because we'll have a much larger surveillance state. We'll have a much worse situation in terms of government control, and more laws and more rules and more powers that have been usurped from the establishment. So this is a terrifying prospect in my mind, and it's the much larger threat than the virus. So I say we have to continue to educate people about this particular situation and the way that it's being handled. And I've also been talking to people to, look inside themselves as well and start learning that, you have individual power and you have knowledge. And if you completely lose yourself in the moment with all of this fear, well, you're going to end up giving all of your power away. You're going to end up suffering as a result.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with what you said. It's a good point that they didn't return our rights that were temporarily suspended after the Patriot Act. So that's something we need to be paying attention to. And it seems like there are two sides to this argument. Like, yes, the virus is real. I agree with you. But yes, economic impact is something to take seriously. And it at least needs to be discussed so that it can be entered into our calculation, into our assessment of what's happening. And it's like, if you even bring up this point, you're a denialist or you're not facing reality. And it's like, no, what I'm trying to do is face reality, because this is happening. So you have to be able to have a balanced view and see both sides of this truth. And at this point, it's getting crazy, because there are people like Paul Offit, he's a famous advocate for vaccines. Everyone thinks he's pro-establishment. He's the guy who you would consider as part of big pharma, right? He is even saying that we're taking this too far. And everyone's like, yo, what? Paul, you don't agree with what everyone else is saying? And he's like, no, we're taking this too seriously. When people like that are calling out against the medical procedures that are being implemented by the government and the state, then that there's a serious problem. Like, we're going to kill you to protect you. It doesn't make sense.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Because it like, how can someone claim that they're going to help you and they think that your health is in their interests, while simultaneously saying, if you don't obey us, we'll kill you, right? That's a completely contradictory situation. And listen, right, Isaac, you're exactly right. We can see the silhouettes of more power plays trying to creep in through media, through social media, and through various outlets. Like I just heard, what was it, the WHO and some of these other institutions talking about not only instituting new health laws in regards to the WHO, but also creating some global digital currency or some global currency in the form of like a one world government. I'm not really a tinfoil hat, crunchy granola conspiracy theorist or anything of that ilk, but I do think, and very obviously and very logically, that if people have power, a bad, nasty situation, they're not going to lose that opportunity to promote their agenda and try to grasp onto as much power as possible. And we're seeing that throughout society and coming into the media, etc. If these guys can take some power, they're going to, and they have no intention of giving it back.
Right. The state will never let a good crisis go to waste. And we are clearly seeing them jump on this opportunity like they have in many Eastern countries where, like in South Korea, they can, I think it was John Vibes who was reporting on this. They have this thing where they can track your phone and location and determine who you've last been in contact with to see who you've exposed to the virus, right? So if they institute that here, they'll have consistent GPS tracking. I mean, they already do to a degree, but like now it's like there's no, well, do they really or do they use it? Like, no, we're using it and we're using it against you. And so I really liked what the independent journalist John Vibes had to say when he said that it's not all of us staying inside that we need to worry about. When technically social distancing is probably smart, but what we need to worry about is what's going to happen when we come back outside. What is going to change to where what liberties have been trampled on? What freedoms have been obliterated in the name of medical security? These are things that we need to take into consideration because the government can do a lot of stuff even while we're out and about, just doing our thing. They don't really need us all to be inside to pull something like this off. So I definitely think they're taking advantage of this. And once we go back out, then we're going to see the real repercussions of what will happen if we allow them to easily take our freedoms without protesting.
Yeah, that's right. And in some countries where the governments are already a lot nastier than in the U.S., and by no stretch of the imagination am I defending the United States government because it's one of the nastiest in the world, but some places in different ways are also nastier. So recently on my Facebook page, I posted about Duterte, the Philippines supreme ruler, who basically just came out publicly and said, if you try to fight against the government, you're going to lose, and I will bury you.
Ugh!
I will kill you if you are out past curfew or if you try to fight against us. So that some of them are even using the virus as a direct threat. And I think this has happened in Serbia as well, where the president has just taken over as many of the powers as possible and has threatened people with severe punishments if they dare step out of their house beyond curfew, or they don't have their papers to go to the grocery store or whatever it may be. So we're already seeing these instances crop up across the globe. And it hasn't gotten to that degree yet in the US, but we are seeing different politicians trying to bring totalitarianism down strongly upon us. And you mentioned the situation with the app and using the app to track locations and to determine who's sick and who's not, etc. I just saw something about in Bellevue, Washington, that they're already implementing an app to track and see if people are abiding by their shelter in place rulings. So,
Oof.
and yeah, all of this just it blows the mind. And I've been talking about this kind of stuff for years, maybe not to the same extent that John or someone like Derek Rose have, because I've kept my message a bit more general. But these guys have specifically been talking about, the encroachment of the surveillance state and the powers that be taking more powers upon themselves. And I've mentioned before multiple times over the last decade that if governments are able to take more power, they will. If they are able to create a situation where they can hurt more people, they will. Where they can imprison more people, they will. Certainly.
Yeah, and the thing is, we can actually pull this off voluntarily. Like before the social distancing mandates came in, and before the force was implemented to quote unquote resolve this situation, people were already maintaining their social distance to a large degree. People were already staying at home who were worried about being infected. So the force, it just seems like it's backfiring in a way where it's like that's not the world we want to live in. Like there are certain trade-offs we have to make when it comes to living in a free society. And one of those trade-offs is you have to be willing to act responsibly, but you also have to be willing to defend your rights. And so when the government comes in and they decide that they're going to do this for us, they actually prevent us from being able to act effectively. And that's one of the problems with implementing force to resolve these kinds of things, because we can do it on our own. And then now that they've decided to use force, we have a world where I can't go to the grocery store without being harassed by police officers.
Yep.
it's kind of like it's like the philosophical problem where, so what do you think about this? So this is this is an old thought experiment where you go into a
Hmm.
hospital and you have 5 patients who need your organs. Should the doctor kill you to save 5 lives? This is I forget the philosophical term for it, but I would say
It's kind of
no.
like yeah, I agree with you. Well, it kind of reminds me of the trolley experiment, philosophical trolley experiment, where if the guys get to determine to pull a lever and send the trolley to run over one guy or to maybe like run over five, which one do you do? Something similar along those lines. But yeah, you're right. I don't, I guess I consider myself more of a deontologist, I guess, or like an ethics of the moment kind of guy, where if it's wrong in my mind to do it, even if it might save more people, I'm probably not going to go through with that if it's unethical or immoral in my mind to begin with. Because I think that what those thought experiments ultimately do is they entrap us into a dichotomous situation where we imagine there's only one or two solutions. And that's one of the great downfalls of some of these thought experiments. Sometimes there are more than other options. We just have to try to consider them and think about them if indeed there's time. But if not, if it was a knee-jerk reaction, I would not be willing to pull the trigger to kill someone, even if it may save other people. Of course, it's never guaranteed if it will or not, except in a thought experiment.
Right, it's not salient that you're going to actually be able to save 100 lives if you take one. It's like you have the option and it's right in front of you. It's a different equation than some cold, calculated, not in the moment situation. And so when it comes to, I remember the term, it's utilitarianism. So when it comes to so here's how this relates to the whole
Yep.
coronavirus thing. So when it comes to not wanting a doctor to kill you to save 5 lives, right? Some would argue that's Kantian. That's like you want to stick to the moral imperative, and you don't want to do the utilitarian thing that
Right.
benefits more people.
Deontological. Yeah.
Right. Some people would say that's what it is, but really, if you think about it, it's still kind of utilitarian because we don't want to live in a world where doctors can just kill you to save 5 people. That's not the existence we want to have. Even if
Right.
it saves 5 more lives, that's not the world that we want. So if you think about it that way, even if more lives are saved by a worldwide lockdown, that's not the world we want. And what the problem is, everyone thinks about it as if this lockdown will just go away after it happens. And like you said with the Patriot Act, I think that was a really good point. They don't just go away. The government holds on to these powers once they express that they can show them. Once they have the powers and they can flex them, they keep them. So in the same sense, even if it saves those 5 other people in the hospital, I don't want the doctor killing me. I don't want these government programs, even if they're in the best interest of saving lives, to come into effect because it's creating a world that's worse. It's a worse world to live in for everyone. And
Yep.
so that's the issue.
Yep. And here, this also speaks to your point. You had touched on it. We don't need governments to institute these rules anyway. They're only able to because most people still harbor the mindset that there's no way that we can voluntarily find solutions to these issues. They still have the mindset that it must be government and government force to to solve these problems. But the reality is, and we've already seen this throughout the market, whenever the market solves problems of logistics, it always has a tendency to work. But people haven't got over this mindset that for some things the government must come in and force people to do A or B, or X won't get executed. And yeah, I think that's totally false. I think not only does the market find a way, but I think also individuals will always try their best. I mean, just for the simple sake of their own survival and meeting their own needs, they're going to work in a communitarian fashion to solve any kind of problem that crops up. And if they don't, they're effectively instituting a death wish. They're invoking Thanatos. And that's, and there are some people that may be willing to do that, but it's certainly better than entrusting an organization that on paper has murdered literally billions of people through the process of democide over the last century. So yeah, it's like,
Right.
why would we entrust our fate to basically a large mafia whenever we can try to solve it? And that's another thing that people don't consider. They don't realize that this organization that effectively acts like a cartel has already harmed so many people, and they're not going to do any good deed to help save us, which goes back to all of our conversation early on.
Yeah. So this is interesting. What it speaks to what you just said. There are places in South America where the government isn't dealing with the virus, and honestly, I don't know how I feel about this, but it's just interesting. There are local gangs who are enforcing curfew because the government won't. So in a sense, that's like the community acting on its own. Now, I still don't approve of it because they're still using force.
Right.
Like they're saying this is still organized crime will handle this. It's not much better than the organized crime of government, but it's interesting how the community can find solutions without the state. So I think what it has to do with is more of a mindset, because you have to ask, how can you do this without force? You have to think more deeply, because everyone normally thinks, oh, we just use force. That's the lazy answer. That's the non-thought out, automatic, reflexive response. But if you think more deeply about something that seems to be simple, you can find creative solutions that actually work better for everyone. You just have to be willing to look.
Yep. And funny when you mentioned that, we don't have to go down this rabbit trail, but it reminded me of parenting, right? A lot of parents, for them, the quick solution, the knee-jerk reaction is to spank or hit their children if they don't obey their dictates. But there are a ton of peaceful parents who find creative solutions and different ways to communicate with their children to keep them out of harm and to make sure that they're able to function in a society. So yeah, there's definitely creative solutions and different ways that we can figure out to solve problems. And it really happens all the time, every single day, outside the narrative of government as a solution to any given problem. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. I like the parenting example because I feel like if everyone was peacefully parented, governments wouldn't exist. That's just my position there. I mean, maybe it's not that easy, but it's at least a step in that direction, because it's getting that frame of thinking creatively about how to solve issues without violence. And if you're taught that from an early age, then that's how you're going to act as an adult, hopefully. So I definitely think that's a good position to look in towards making a more peaceful society in the future.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if people, and this is the whole idea of trauma and how it gets passed down from generation to generation. But part of that trauma is if children were hit and they were harmed, then they automatically believe that's how they're supposed to solve problems. So that becomes a de facto solution to any kind of problem that they see as they're growing up. So what happens is people project these familial experiences onto the government, right? And that's why governments oftentimes harbor the mommy and the daddy and the uncle metaphors, right? It's the fatherland, it's Uncle Sam, etc. And so these familial projections are ultimately what lead into violence and violent dictates and violent acts, and why people, and this has been a big criticism that I've leveled and conveyed the last couple of weeks as this thing has escalated, that you can see people just begging for their own enslavement, begging for government to come in and enact their curfews, begging for them to come in and find solutions, and to hurt people, to threaten people for going against their rules. I've already heard of one story, and this is very close to where I live here in Texas, but these folks actually got tested for COVID-19, and they were tested positive. And when they got home from the doctor, they were told not to leave their house. Well, they left their house anyway against their orders, and everyone in the town found out about it, and they quickly grabbed their torches and their pitchforks, and they went out and they were saying these people need to be arrested, they need to be put in jail, Some people are even saying these folks need to get killed. They need to have what
Jesus
they
Christ.
deserve because they decide, even though they tested positive, they simply decided to go out around in society. And I argued this with several people in a more personal setting, not even on my public feed. And what I would say is, this is a slippery slope, right? What happens one day when government decides that because the flu is highly infectious and it kills a lot of people every year during flu season, especially older people, just like coronavirus does? What happens when governments decide that if you have the flu and you leave the house, you should go to jail or you should be killed or any number of things? I mean, now it's whatever government decides is infectious or a disease. Now they'll get to determine what constitutes that. And like you said, we come around full circle here, is it comes back to, what does change when we start to go outside of our house? Are we allowed to go outside of our house if we're sick or have some kind of disease? What is the ultimate expression of government power and control over people who are alleged to be sick? It's a scary proposition. It's very Orwellian.
Yeah, it is. And even if these measures save lives, the point is that's not the world that we all want to exist in together. We want a better vision for the future, and that is not something that it includes. There are risks when it comes to life, and there are especially risks when it comes to living a free life. And do you want total security, or do you want true freedom? And I think there is people have this idea that there's this perfect balancing act where I can just give up, half my freedoms and I'll be safe. And then all their freedoms are gone. And sure, they might be safe, but they're not living, they're not thriving. They're living under this established control of Big Brother, which based on our family conversation has a different context now. So
Yep.
Yeah, it's making the world obviously worse. And you can't use the idea that we're saving lives to justify that.
Right, because ultimately more lives will be lost in the process because, Wes, we know security under government is ultimately a delusion.
Yes, it is. And even if more lives were saved, let's just give them the argument. Even if they successfully save more lives, I would still be against it because, like you said, these measures stay in effect.
Yep.
The world becomes a darker place. Do you want more people living in a sadder world, or maybe a few less people living in a much brighter place? Well, I prefer the second option. Maybe that's open to others. So regardless of everything that's happening, there's a lot of theories and a lot of different ideas on what's going on, but we don't really all have control over what's happening in the external world, but we do all have control over our own lives, over our own inner domain. We have self-ownership. So with all this newfound time that we have suddenly found ourselves with, what are some good ways that you would suggest managing that time?
Yeah, I actually love this question because since all this started happening, there's a new area of thought that's part of the anarchist lexicon that I haven't really dove into too much, whereas some other folks clearly have. But I've been really interested lately in spending my time researching self-reliance, right? After all this stuff cropped up, I started thinking about it and talking to my wife about it. But if shit really hit the fan and got really, really bad, are we prepared to live without needing or requiring some other type of assistance or help, be it government, be it private organization, be it anybody? And I thought, man, I don't know that we're exactly ready. We could maybe survive a couple of weeks on purely what we have at the house. So what I did was start spending time looking into the prepper movement and being self-prepared in the event of a disaster. So that includes making sure that we have enough food, enough water, enough gear, enough tools, and enough weapons to survive a calamity of epic proportions. If the grid were to go down, if a legit zombie apocalypse were to strike the world, and I say that half-heartedly,
Right.
of course.
Right.
And so what I've spent a good amount of time besides working, and we can talk about that too, is looking at some of these YouTube channels that focus on prepping and being prepared in the case of a disaster. And that includes channels like the Canadian Prepper YouTube channel, the Urban Prepper, and also you've seen other anarchists start to talk about this who maybe haven't talked about it as much before, like Jeff Berwick. In some of his recent videos, he's talked about prepping. And I'm not just talking about, go out and buy, several tons of toilet paper and hope that saves the day. I'm talking about making sure you have good enough food and water, and you have maybe you even have purification tools where you can purify water if you need to. Another thing that I've spent my time doing, I've been doing a lot of shooting lately, right? And I've been trying to get better at handling firearms and weapons. And there's a lot of channels online. I don't always agree with all their like political opinions. It's a lot of people who are like on the far right, some paleo conservatives and some warmongers and those kind of things. But
Right.
I've gleaned a lot of knowledge from these folks. A lot of them are ex-military, so they know how to have firefights and handle a rifle. So I've really started to explore those territories, and I think it'd be well worth anyone who has a little extra time as a result of this to look into the prepping school of thought and to really embrace the anarchist mantra of self-reliance, because that's part of our school of thought. If we're going to be an anarchist and we're going to exercise self-ownership and responsibility, by the same token, I think we should exercise self-reliance, and we should make sure we can take care of ourselves, our wives, our husbands, our loved ones, and those closest to us in time of need.
I really like that. It's hard to be an anarchist if you're completely dependent on the state. And I'm not saying that qualifies you or disqualifies you or any judgmental thing like that, but it definitely puts you more in if you're self-reliant and you can handle your own in the event of a real disaster. And not to say this isn't a real disaster, but I listen to people who are like, they're experts in infectious diseases, but like these guys, they research a pandemic that has a 60% mortality rate. Not, this thing's closer to 1%. I'm not saying that that's not high, but imagine if this thing was 60%. Things would be a lot worse. Things would be crazy. I mean, they're already a little insane, but all I'm saying is this is not the apocalyptic pandemic. We'll bounce back. We'll get through it together. So the problem is, though, it could have been the apocalypse virus that can kill half of the world. We're lucky it wasn't. Right. But if we view this as a dress rehearsal, well, so far, most of us are failing the dress rehearsal.
True.
But that's okay. Yeah, I would have too. Yeah. But if we pay attention to how we're failing and why, then the next time this comes around and it's worse, hopefully that doesn't happen, but if it does, we are prepared and we are ready. And this whole coronavirus pandemic might be even worth it, because it might be the reason we survive a more extreme pandemic, because it got us to pay attention on these important things like self-reliance. So I do hope those ideologies spread throughout the culture, because then people will be more prepared in the case that occurs, which some people say pandemics are guaranteed. I like to think on the more optimistic side, but it's not always how the world works in terms of trying to have a positive outlook and kind of force it onto reality. It doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's easy for us to put our own, rose-tinted perspectives onto the world. I do it too all the time. Of course, if we embrace the anarchist school of thought, a lot of times we get called idealists, when really we're the most practical kind of people in terms of like the way the economy works and the way that people self-motivate and the way that they interact in the economy and those kind of things. It's very practical in that regard. But yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, I didn't even I wasn't thinking along the lines of self-reliance. I was fully relied on the system, and not even just to say that being relied on the state, but also relying on basically it's called the just-in-time food system that exists, right? Through the logistical systems of mass grocery retailers. Being in a situation where we don't have to rely on those guys as well is super important. And of course, I'm not saying that the market is bad. Those technologies that bring us food in due time are amazing technologies, but they're not 100% foolproof in the event of a disaster. So yeah, this coronavirus thing, it completely woke me up to that. And it also reminded me that I need to learn more skills especially as it comes to self-defense and defending my wife and my family. And so that's where another piece of the puzzle that I think is important to mention is that we should do what we can to create friendship circles, freedom cells, as Derek calls them, and groups of anarchist and free thinking allies who can effectively skill share all of these ideas and put their heads together and help sustain each other in the event that something like this does happen. Here's one example. If you have a freedom cell or you have a friendship circle, is what some left anarchist thinkers call it. Basically, what you can do is there's this tool called Gotenna. Gotenna is a mesh network, and this mesh network is basically allows for off-the-grid communications. If you're within 4 miles of somebody with a Gotenna unit, you can communicate with them without a problem. And then if there's someone else 4 miles away from them and 4 miles away from them, you can use those guys as nodes to hop your message to the guy who's like 20 miles away. So another thing that's happening with this tool is that soon you're going to be able to send cryptocurrency transactions through the Gotenna mesh network, as so long as somebody has either a connection to the internet or they're using something like Blockstream's satellite blockchain that they're beaming down. So this is an amazing technology that groups of people could use in grid down situations or in situations where they want to communicate with their friends in times of need. And yes, you're 100% right, Isaac. This coronavirus situation is not an apocalyptic situation by any stretch of the imagination. At worst, it's going to cause government to grab more power, but it's not the end of things. This thing will abate. But yes, who knows in this really strange world and chaotic world we live in, what's going to happen next or what's going to be right around the corner. You never know. And it's always good to be prepared. And that's just part of being an anarchist, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully this encourages that form of preparedness that's actually functional. You know, like you said, like you don't want to have a bunch of toilet paper just sitting around, which interestingly, I read something about how they strategically said that toilet paper was running out when it wasn't running out, so that people would go buy supplies, but they wouldn't buy all of the essential items like food. Because if you announce that food's running out, all the valuable food will immediately disappear.
Yeah.
But if you announce toilet paper is running out, then people will go grab toilet paper, which isn't that important, and grab the food as they need it. I think it was something they did in Operation Mockingbird or something. I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Something like that wouldn't surprise me either. And I mean, we do have some evidence that with all this COVID-19 stuff, that a lot of politicians and high-level establishment players knew that it was coming because they traded off all of their stocks.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, right. But they didn't tell us then.
Right.
And they really care about you. It's just, that's a great point, actually, because that was a month before they saw it was getting serious. I didn't hear anything. So in terms of technology, like you just mentioned that new technology, what investments do you think, are there any worth looking into right now? I know the market's down. I don't know how that affects cryptocurrency. How do you think that all plays into this?
Yeah, this is something very important to talk about because it goes along with self-reliance and also the sort of the anarchist spirit of being able to trade with people without having to rely on the Federal Reserve and the financial system as it stands. Because if all that collapses, the dollars are going to be worthless anyway. And government's already, even right now, as we speak, they're hyperinflating the currency. They're trying to give everybody $1,200. If you have kids, $500. So they're just putting trillions of dollars of inflated currency out into supply, which is not a good thing and can have grave consequences on the economy. It's not stimulus by any stretch of the imagination. What it is, it's a basically a card that says, hey, will you please forgive my tyranny? Take this $1,200. It's a get out of jail free card, right, for the government and their actions.
Oh my gosh.
So one of the things that we have to focus on then is trying to leverage currencies and technologies that allow us to communicate value whenever the system fails or the grid goes down, et cetera. And I think cryptocurrency is still up there on the top of the list. Yes, it's down right now, but it's not as down as the stock markets or the monetary systems. It's nowhere near as in bad of shape. I think when the word got out that shit was going to hit the fan, quote unquote, crypto did crash a little bit, but Bitcoin has managed to find its way back up. And of course, it got down a little bit again. But this cryptocurrencies are always going to exist, even in a grid down situation. As I just mentioned, you can use a mesh network and connect to a satellite and still do cryptocurrency transactions. It can never be completely eliminated. So the arguments about someone having the ability to use an EMP and kill the grid, make Bitcoin useless, is no longer a valid argument, because this technology is right here. I mean, the satellites beaming down the Bitcoin network already exist, and these mesh networks already exist. So it's very possible. We're just waiting on some of the final usability applications to come into place. You'll still be able to trade cryptocurrency in Bitcoin. And Bitcoin specifically is about to undergo the halvening, right? Which means that miners, it's going to be harder for them to mine coins. They're going to receive less rewards. So the circulation and supply is likely to go up. So yes, I still think Bitcoin is perfectly, I have my problems with the spendability and usability of Bitcoin, but I don't think that's this particular talk is the time or place for that. But I still think Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, I think Ethereum still is pretty decent. Decred. Some of the altcoins, though, you have to be really cautious of in terms of investing, especially if you're investing in your future well-being, because most of the altcoins have been based on these Ethereum decentralized autonomous networks and those models, and there haven't really been a killer app. And if there has been a killer app, the killer app has been the scam coin, right? So most of these have been, we've seen them come out as scams or some kind of shoddy project that didn't make it or that failed. So be wary of that. But I just think cryptocurrency in general, do your research, of course, is always going to have some type of value in any kind of market, because now we're putting ourselves in a position where we can use it even in a worst case shit hits the fan scenario.
That's interesting. So Bitcoin can work without internet. So that's a mesh. Can you tell me more about the mesh network?
Yeah, so a mesh network is just basically a network that we're able to throw up and create on a moment's notice if we have the technology. So just as an example, this, and I just bought one of these. You can go to gotenna.com and you can purchase 2 at a time, 4 at a time, 6 at a time, 8 at a time, something of that nature. And once you get them, then this is how it works. Now, there is a downside of this. You do have to have access to electricity to make this thing stay functional. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But basically, you download an app on your phone, right? And you have the GoTenna near you. You can use this app to send basically their high frequency, ham radio like communications to someone else with a GoTenna completely off the grid, as long as they're within that 4-mile radius. And the technology that they're building into this is called Textenna. And with Textenna, you can text Bitcoin transactions over the mesh network to somebody else. Now, the key there is someone still one of the people in the network still have to have access to the internet to transmit cryptocurrency. If they don't have access to the internet, they need to be beaming down the satellite connection from Blockstream so that they have access to it. So with no grid whatsoever, it's still possible to make those Bitcoin transactions and to use this GoTenna tool. And there's going to be other tools that are going to be cropping up as well. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned the problem of electricity. So if the electricity goes down, then you could potentially be screwed if your cell phone dies and you can't use or your GoTenna device dies and you can't use those anymore. So what a lot of people are doing is they're actually going to places like, what is the name of it is slipping my mind. Zero Game, something like that. It's a company that sells solar powered hubs where you can buy this hub or this generator, and you get a few solar panels for a reasonable price. I think you can get like $500 or $600, and you can get a decent solar setup. And what some people are doing are setting up these solar setups in hidden locations, and then connecting a GoTenna device and setting that device to relay mode, so that basically it's always going to have some power, right? Because they've got it set up permanently to unless of course the solar panels were damaged somehow, but they're constantly on relay set up to these solar panels, and that's happening in certain places right now. So that's one possible solution to the electricity issue. And I think it's smart for preppers in general to start thinking about using solar power and leveraging solar power to keep your devices powered and to have some ability to communicate with electricity, even if the grid goes down. So, That's
That is crazy interesting. So can you imagine the dollar collapses, but everyone who has Bitcoin is just fine. And then, oh, Bitcoin's going to go up in value then, because it's the only feasible currency. And by this point, the mesh network thing, it will probably once I mean, there's already a market for it. So that's just going to keep becoming more simple, more easy to use, and more widespread. And so that would be, even after this current pandemic plays out, that would be worthwhile in terms of preparing for like the next one or any collapse or anything like that. That way, that off grid network is ready. Because
yep.
do you think Bitcoin would collapse if the US currency collapsed? I don't think it would, but I don't
No,
know.
no, I don't think so. The only reason that I mean, of course, Bitcoin is not pegged to the dollar. People only provide exchange rates and exchange ratios and values to the dollar because it's the most prevalent currency. But lots of apps now, Bitcoin wallets, cryptocurrency wallets, you can compare the price of Bitcoin with a bunch of different wallets, and there's nothing that says cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, etc. Can't be a unit of account. It can work as a unit of account on its own right. Of course, it is a bit more challenging since you break it down to the millionth decimal point, and in hyperbolic speech. So that presents a little bit of a challenge, but it is possible to use it as a unit of account. So I don't think the value is just going to crash. People would just start using some kind of crypto, or they would use a stable coin, right? A stable coin might maintain some value on its own without being attached to a dollar, or they might attach a stable coin to Bitcoin so that it can have one-for-one value. So there's a
Ah,
ton of options. There's a ton of options for stabilizing cryptocurrency and using them as a unit of account. Right now, lots of companies have created stable coins that have attached themselves or pegged themselves to the dollar in a one-to-one fashion. Like USDC is one of the most popular ones. That was a creation by Coinbase. But you can potentially just use those stable coins to have a one-to-one ratio with Bitcoin, at what we would think of as a dollar, quote unquote. So yeah, there's lots of ways to do this, and certainly cryptocurrency is it's not going to be easy to crash cryptocurrency even in a grid down situation. Even if the monetary system collapses, it's still going to be around.
yeah,
Firmly believe.
it almost seems like cryptocurrency would increase in value because it's the only value left. If the dollar collapses, it's like, oh, well, what is there now? Well, there's Bitcoin, especially if you know how to use it. So that ties in pretty well to my last question, and I'm curious if this kind of comes into your answer. So, what do you think we can do to minimize the impact of the economic recession that is inevitably going to soon be upon us? Do you think cryptocurrency plays into that?
Yeah, I think cryptocurrency is definitely going to play into that. I think being able to, here's a thing in my mind that could be key. A lot of folks who have lost their jobs, I think, what is it, 6.6 million, probably more than that now, have applied for unemployment. It's very possible that if a lot of these folks wanted to try to build a new economy based on crypto, there's a lot of opportunities still out there for diving onto systems where they could make money from crypto, starting to work from home online where they get paid in cryptocurrency. Like there's a lot of writing jobs out there, especially in the cryptocurrency news space, even right now, where people could still find some jobs if they're into writing is difficult, so not everybody's into that, but there are those kind of opportunities. And it's also simply possible that cryptocurrency in these times could continue to see a resurgence if indeed the dollar is so hyperinflated that it becomes worthless. And we've already seen this in places like Venezuela, where the bolivar has been so hyperinflated that it's only worth it'll only be as good as toilet paper, except now the toilet paper is probably worth even more in the United States at least. So there's
Right.
that. But yeah, the currency collapse. So they've been using cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency mining in places like Venezuela, and it's helped sustain some of those folks. And because of it, they've even made more money, way more money than they would have made at their daily jobs. Just as an example, when Steemit came out, people were writing articles on Steemit. There were people from these third world countries who were making a killing on these platforms simply because their money was worthless. And what they were seeing come in from the crypto space was an astronomical amount of money compared to what they've ever seen in their lives. So the worse off that the the economic situation gets in the US, the more power that cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency networks and cryptocurrency opportunities will have. And I also think that we're going to continue to build microeconomies. And if an economic disaster, it's possible that those events, those black swan type of events, could usher in more microeconomies where people are using different kinds of apps to service needs in the community. Maybe one day even the corporate grocery store goes away, and people on an individual and communitarian level are now servicing the needs of their local communities rather than having to rely on these just-in-time food services. So this is a big change that could actually happen as a result of these global black swan incidents that crop up. There's a lot of different ways that technology, in my opinion specifically, can help us, not just cryptocurrency, but decentralized tech and tech that brings back micro entrepreneurship and that brings back microeconomies.
Yeah, there is definitely a light to be seen here. So thank you again, Sterlin, for coming on. It's been a real pleasure. Always happy to share these ideas with you.
Absolutely. I think we had a fantastic discussion.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Sterlin. I found it immensely beneficial myself. If you want to find more, you can reach him on sterlinlujan.com or on his cryptocurrency startup, pathfinders.io. The next episode is with Amesh Aldaja from the Johns Hopkins University of Infectious Diseases, and we do an update on the pandemic in 20 minutes. He seems hopeful some aspects of society will be returning to normal sooner than later, and I share his optimism. If you enjoy this podcast, the easiest way to support it is by sharing it with others. Bring up an episode during your next conversation, or share it on social media. If you're so inclined, you can also support it on Patreon under the podcast name. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me, and I hope to see you on the next episode of The Lucid Truth.